All right, I want to talk about Sharpe, all things Sharpe. Richard Sharpe, the adventures of Richard Sharpe, really just used as a vehicle just to talk about all things Napoleonic War or Peninsular War. I'm joined by my friend Dan. All right.
Hello.
So yeah, I thought we could just go through all the Sharpe books and just talk about each book, like do them chronologically through the character Sharpe's life, and then talk about the TV adaptation if there is one, and then also talk about the real historical events of each one, because each book is sort of based around some sort of event in history, isn't it? Like usually the most of the Sharpe books, it's like a big siege that happened in the Napoleonic Wars or a big battle that happened in the Peninsular War. So yeah, I thought we could do that. Are you up for it, Dan?
Yeah, it sounds good, mate. Yeah, let's do it. Yeah.
Because I did think
Yeah,
about how. Oh, sorry, go on.
I was just going to say there's so much to talk about. Obviously we're talking about what 15 plus years of history, and multiple campaigns and multiple countries. So there's an awful lot to talk about.
Right, yeah. So just to give people who might not know anything about Sharpe, just a bit of an overview. There's like, how many novels are there? There's loads. The first one is this one, Sharpe's Tiger, which is meant to be 1799. It's like a prequel, really. There's a few prequels, aren't there,
Yeah.
before the actual Peninsular War stuff, like Sharpe proper, if you like. And then it
Mm.
goes through to the last. They're all things like Sharpe's Prey, Sharpe's Rifle, Sharpe's Eagle, Sharpe's Company, whatever. Last one's Sharpe's Devil. So yeah, my Sharpe knowledge is, I would say, extensive, but I'd say yours is legion. So I'm looking forward to picking your brain about it. But yeah, these first ones, these prequels, what do you make of them in general before we get stuck in?
Yeah, I mean, like you say, the classic Sharpe is the Peninsula Campaign, right? And those were the first ones that Bernard Cornwell wrote.
Yeah. So
So
what was the first one he wrote? Do you know? Was it
it was Sharpe's Eagle.
Eagle? Right.
Yeah, Sharpe's Eagle, which is a fantastic book and I mean, an amazing first novel. I think it's his first one that he ever published. And that is, you see Sharpe kind of almost fully formed there, where he's a lieutenant in the Rifles, and he's attached to a regiment of foot in the Light Company, and everything from that point on is classic Sharpe, where he's an officer and he's clashing with the educated upper class officers uh,
Because
that
he's the
he's not a
rare
part of.
exception of a man that's come up through the ranks to be a lieutenant, isn't he? That's his thing.
Yeah,
His classic thing.
exactly. That's kind of the core of the novels from that point on. And then the prequels he wrote much later. I think the first ones he started in the early 80s, and then these prequel ones in India, I think, were like uh, year 2000 onwards.
I
I
think
know that when I first
1997 Tiger came out, I think. But yeah, anyway,
right, okay,
a lot later. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and so we go back to these prequels, and it's like Sharpe is not. There's a lot that happens in it where, how can I put it? The things that make the Sharpe series great aren't a part of these prequels, which makes them a bit difficult to get into. And I think Tiger, I don't know what you thought about it as a novel, but I think it's one of the weaker ones in the series, if not the weakest out of all of them.
Really?
It's still good because it's Bernard Cornwell, but it just for me it starts with him being a private, and there isn't really the conflict, and there's not really the as much that makes it really interesting and engaging. I didn't think. Do you want to go through the plot, the rough outline of what happens in the story?
Yeah, we can do that. Yeah. Well, so it starts with, as a fair few of them do, with an action scene. Like, just starts. He's just about to
Mm,
go into battle,
cold
or
open.
sorry.
Yeah, it's like a cold open, isn't it? Where it starts and he's marching towards the enemy. Yeah.
Yeah. There's more than one where it just starts like either in the middle of a battle or it's just about to go into it. And this is one. And there's yeah, so just a grand overview is that yeah, he's a a private, and you're introduced to his sergeant, the Sergeant Hakeswill, really almost straight away, who's like just a brilliant baddie, isn't he? But ultimately, there's this. They're at the siege of Seringapatam. Am I pronouncing that right? How do you pronounce it? Seringapatam.
Seringapatam.
Seringapatam, I think it is Seringapatam. Which
that's,
modern
that's
day.
Yeah, go on.
As I say, today, modern day, the place is called Seringapatana, but back then it was Seringapatam. Seringapatam. Anyway, yeah, and so it's the fourth. The historical context is it's the fourth Anglo-Mysore War, 1799, the very end of the set of 4 wars we've had with them over a generation. And Mysore is in sort of central southern India. And the antagonist, the leader of the Indian side, is a guy called Tippoo Sultan, who's the son of an even more great leader, Hyder Ali. The British had, like I say, many wars with, or the East India Company, the Honourable East India Company. And by 1799, like, so the big great battle of Plassey, what, 1757, 58? And after that, it's when the East India Company really gets its talons into India. So by 1799, at the end of the fourth Anglo-Mysore War, we're quite a long way down the stage, quite a long way down the path of British involvement or East India Company involvement in India. So that's sort of and we've got to Tippoo Sultan, the Tiger of Mysore. We've got to his capital, Seringapatam, and the British are besieging it, or the British and Indian allies. There's also lots of sepoy allies with the British. In fact, actual British troops are quite in the minority, or there's a Maratha confederacy with them as well. So there's a lot of Indians versus the tyrant of Mysore. So that's sort of the historical context. And yeah, and the novel just starts with Sharpe about to go into not a big battle, but some sort of engagement with the Tippoo's men, and so that's where it starts. Yeah, should we get into the actual like meat and veg of the plot, or do you want to say something about sort of the East India Company and the British in India and stuff?
Well, yeah, he makes a point in the book, doesn't he, that most of the East India Company troops are Indian. So there's most of the troops are these sepoy battalions, which are Indian infantry, but mostly controlled by British or even European officers and NCOs. And then it's the Indians that are organised into the battalions and regiments that do most of the fighting. And there's only, I think there's an army of, I think it's about 50,000 troops in total, and I think there's about 5,000 of those are British, as in European, and the rest of the soldiers are Indian. But the East India Company employs mostly British, but as you see in the novel, there's in the series anyway, there's officers hired by the East India Company from all different parts of Europe. And the start of the novel is where you've got, I think, 3 separate armies converging on Seringapatam from different directions. So you've got the British under, is it General Harris? Is that his name? Harris? Anyway, the main British army leaving from Madras, crossing the country to attack Seringapatam, and then you've got another army from the other side of the country also attacking Tippoo's armies. And there's
the Nizam of Hyderabad is the ally.
He's the British ally.
Yeah, it's Lieutenant General Harris is the overall commander, and his 2 major subalterns in the field are Harris and Wellesley.
Yeah, so Harris is the main general, and then there's Baird, isn't it? Baird and Wellesley are the 2.
So all these are like real historical figures, and they appear in the book, don't they?
Yeah, and then the first engagement is where the Tippoo comes out from his main cities to try and stop the advance, and that's where the opening of the book is, isn't it? Where he comes out and he's trying to stop the line of march with a battle, but it just gets brushed aside really, really easily, basically, doesn't
Yeah.
he? They that's the thing about they emphasize in the book, in all of the three books that are set in India. The Indians are have excellent artillery. Their cannons are fantastic, and their gun crews are really good, and they really love their guns. They love their big guns, and they rely on them too much. So they, in the opening, it kind of expect to stop the British and the Sepoy battalions with just artillery, but the British just can just march straight through the guns basically, um, and then they have the Tippoo sends one of his regiments down to engage, and they just get brushed aside, and they just turn around and run away, and then that's the end of the battle basically. And then the Tippoo just withdraws to Seringapatam, where he's got huge walls and hundreds and hundreds of cannons on the walls, and he expects to be able to survive a siege for long enough for the monsoons to come, which will then drive the British away. So that's the Tippoo's strategy for victory, and the British tactic is just to get there as soon as possible and storm the walls
Blast a
before
breach in the walls and just run in.
before the monsoon comes.
Yeah.
So that's the British plan.
Yeah, and we was able to just brush him aside because it's one of those cliches maybe, but the British are great at musketry, just well drilled, really well drilled musketry, and yeah, forming into lines and half companies, and just like the drill parade ground where you can just all the men just work like clockwork.
Sure. Yeah. Well drilled. Yeah.
And when a cannonball blasts a hole in the line, they just all the corporals and sergeants just shuffle everyone along to fill the hole and just keep
Fill the
going.
gaps. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, that's sort of the overall picture for it. But in the book, in the novel, Sharpe gets involved in politics with his hated Sergeant Hakeswill, who I think you're right actually when you said it's one of the weaker ones. I wouldn't call it the weakest, but it's among the weaker ones, and I would agree just because I think it's sort of quite self-consciously a prequel. One of those things. It expects you to already be a Sharpe fan, I think, and expects you to know a lot about him and his idiosyncrasies and things. So it doesn't bother explaining loads of them. You're supposed to be familiar with his character basically, and a lot of the other characters in it that we'll talk about, like Lawford and Wellesley. You see Wellesley for the first time. Do you say Wellesley or Wellesley?
I'll just say Wellesley. Yeah.
Wellesley, yeah.
Yeah.
And one of them is Hakeswill, his sergeant, Obadiah Hakeswill, who in the TV adaptations is played by Postlethwaite, isn't it? Pete Postlethwaite.
Yeah.
Great bit of acting. And so yeah, I suppose we need to talk about Hakeswill because that is the next part of the book, isn't it? It just starts with his tensions with Hakeswill, and he's just such a horrible bastard, isn't he?
Hakeswill, yeah, he's pure evil. He's just a nasty piece of work through and through. He's cunning and cowardly and physically disgusting, and
Or the
he's just a
devil.
repulsive.
He says like you see the devil behind his eyes. One of those people, a sadistic bastard who goads people into insubordination and then punishes you for it. Or like engineer ways to get you flogged and stuff. Like terrible. Or he mentioned something about he will he'll get someone brought up on charges and they're going to be flogged, and in order to save them from the flogging, he'll demand money or demand to sleep with their wife or something.
Yeah.
Just completely corrupt, just abusing his power at every possible turn.
Yeah, it's hard to find a more evil and repulsive character in literature. Really,
it's really well done, isn't it? I mean,
you can't hate him enough. Oh yeah, you got to give it to him. Yeah, he's a great character. I think in the prequels he occasionally veers into almost cartoonishly evil, and he can kind of rely. He kind of he's so dark. The humor is so black, but he also there is humor in Hakeswill too. He's so evil, it's funny, and then occasionally in maybe a bit in this book and in the next one. It kind of strains credulity a little bit about how evil and nasty he is. But and
Because
the other thing
Sharp
is,
runs into him a lot, like all through the series.
yeah, he meets him years later, yeah, and it all comes to a conclusion in my favourite book of the series, which is Sharpe's Enemy, which is set, I don't know, 1808 or 9 or something like that. So 10 years later. So yeah, it is a long running baddie, and he's like he's a major part of the series, Hakeswill.
I did watch a few reviews, short 10-minute reviews on YouTube by people with very small channels, just to see if to get any insights. And there was one guy, he waxed lyrical about how great Hakeswill is as a baddie. And there was one other guy did say, Hakeswill is a bit two-dimensional. I think he even said, bordering on cartoonish. But yeah, he's so great, and he's such an arse licker as well, isn't he? He's always sucking up to the officers, and that terrifying thing of like despising the men, and that they know he despises them, and they despise him back. And like, what a terrible thing to have someone that's got the power of life and death over you, because a flogging is quite often be you're flogged to death, so to have the power of life and death over you for almost anything is like such great power, and to just abuse it at all costs. And I think it's played really well by Pete Postlethwaite, I must say.
Yeah, he's brilliant. Yeah, that's one of the things that I was when I was reading it again recently. I was like, the fact that he's got this violent twitch, where it's I don't know, it's what they would probably call today ableist or something, where like you've got a baddie who's got a disability, got a physical disability to emphasize their moral evilness or whatever. But yeah, Pete Postlethwaite does that fantastically, and it's something that these spasms that Hakeswill has when he's standing to attention to an officer, where he's completely obsequious and completely obedient to any officer, at least on the surface.
Like he says "sir" too much, doesn't he? A bit too much.
Yeah.
Like he says that at the end of nearly everything he says when he's addressing an officer, or he always says so in the scriptures.
Says so in the scriptures, yeah.
Says so in the scriptures.
Yeah, he says that all the time. Isn't there? Yeah, there's a bit in the story, isn't there? Because Hakeswill always, it says some bit of folk wisdom or something from the army regulations, something like that, and then he finishes it off by saying that it says so in the scriptures, which is obviously ridiculous.
Yeah.
And then he says that repeatedly all through the story, and then there's a great kind of payoff when they're in the cells in Seringapatam near the end, where what's his name, the Scottish McCandless, yeah, and McCandless says it back to, like, because occasionally an officer will say, like, no, it doesn't. It will say, it certainly doesn't say that in the scriptures, something like that. And then, but yeah, McCandless actually quotes scripture back to Hakeswill and then follows it up by saying it says so in the scriptures.
There's one point in that dungeon when Hakeswill says something that, again, just obviously is in the scriptures, like speaking back to a sergeant is a flogging offence or something. It says so in the scriptures. And McCandless is like, you say that one more time, and I'll throttle you myself or something like that.
Yeah.
Because he's a really, really pious character as well, isn't he? But so I mean, what happens in the plot is that, one of the things I think Cornwell's really good at is throwing in exposition and it not being really jarring, because that's so easy to do, isn't it? When you're writing a novel, to just do a whole bunch of exposition right at the beginning, it's the easiest thing in the world for it to be clunky and horrible. But then somehow, Cornwell's a master of avoiding that. And so, right at the beginning, you get quite a lot of detail in quick succession about Sharpe. They tell you he's about 22. He's not sure exactly how old he is, but he's 22. I think it says he's from London, but it does say he's been in the army for 6 years. So obviously he joined when he was about 16, like a boy
When he
soldier.
was 16, yeah.
And that he had seen one action before in Flanders. It just mentions it, but he'd seen a couple of people shot, and he just shot his rifle, and that was it. And then his company went home. But he'd seen some sort of action in Flanders, and yeah, it mentions that he was from a foundling home, which is a very old-fashioned way of saying he was an orphan. Really, his mum gave him up.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, no, she died. I think he's the son of a Cat Lane whore.
yes, that's
And,
it. Cat Lane whore.
Yeah, and she dies when he's very young, and then he goes to the foundling home. Yeah. So he says in some of the books, I can't remember if it's this one or not. He says he can barely remember her, or he doesn't really remember her, but he vaguely does. He vaguely remembers her saying that he was a July baby or maybe a June baby. Can't remember. So he's not sure how old he is. Yeah, but yeah. So then he went to a foundling home, an orphanage, where he just grew up unpicking tarred ropes off ships to so the foundling home owners could sell the strands from the ropes to make some money.
See, this is where your sharp general knowledge is better than mine, because and none of that is in. It just mentions the founding home, and that's it in Tiger. Do you know
Is
where
it
you're
right?
getting the rest of that from? Like what book it is?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not sure. Because also what happens is because he wrote them, because the chronological order that we're reading them in is very, very different to the order that he wrote and released them, and it's over a 30-year period that he wrote them. It's actually full of contradictions,
Yeah, yeah.
and
I've heard
there's
him talk
there's
about that
stuff.
in interview. Yeah.
Oh, really? Yeah. I think I've not heard him say. I think I've read some answers that he's given on his website. 'Cause he's been quite active on over the years on his website answering people's questions. And I think I read one where he just said, "Yeah, I just don't worry about it. Like,
Yeah, I
just
saw him in an
don't
interview
think
just
about
the
it
other
too much."
day saying he's going to write. He wants to write another one, sort of, but set right in the middle of Sharpe's life, to be at a specific battle. But he said he'd already written into the canon that Sharpe's in Essex at that point. And he said, "Well, I really want to write this novel, though. So if or when fans write to me saying, 'Oh no, Sharpe's in Essex. He couldn't possibly be in France or Spain or whatever it is,' he says, 'Well, I'm just going to ignore those letters.'" That's
Yeah,
it. Sorry, I
yeah. He says
interrupted you.
no, just wait when you go through and you read it. Read them in order. When you get to the later ones, it like flatly contradicts something that you read in the last book, where it will say he says like in Sharpe's Havoc, he meets and fights alongside General Daddy Hill in Portugal, and then in the next book he says oh he'd never met General Daddy Hill before, but he'd heard he was like this, blah, blah, blah. And he like in the last book he had a few conversations with him, and then and also he'll say stuff like, oh, he'd never spoken to an educated woman before, but then in the previous books he's had a long-term love affair with a lady of the nobility. So the inconsistencies are rife through the series, but you just have to let it go because you
Yeah,
can't just
yeah.
you just he just doesn't care. There's also some characters that get killed, and then they just pop up in the later books. There's like a few. There's like Rifleman Cooper or one of them is in Sharpe's Rifles, and then he gets killed in Sharpe's Rifles, and then like 3 or 4 books later, he's in it again. But yeah, it's just
Or one thing
not worry
on
about
that note I wanted to ask you about is about Sharpe, whether he's supposed to be a northerner like Sean Bean, because everyone that's watched Sharpe knows Sean Bean plays it as a northerner. And I've heard that Bernard Cornwell really liked Sean Bean as Sharpe. Bernard Cornwell liked the TV adaptations, and he
it.
said, I've seen him say more than once, yeah, Sean Bean plays a blinder. And I heard that he, after the first TV series, after the first TV stuff that came out in the 90s, he was happy to write Sharpe as Bean in a way to make him a northerner. But I think there's also other places where he says he's from London, and
Yeah, he's
certainly he doesn't
cool.
play up that he's a northerner.
Mm.
Not in Tiger anyway, or in most of the books he doesn't. What do you got to say about that?
yeah, you're right. What happened is exactly that. And then the books that he wrote after, he he actually says that in later books, I think in the prequels as well, he says what happens is he's born in London and he grows up in London, and then at some point he kills someone or he gets some reason to run away to the north of England, and he runs away to Yorkshire, and then he lives some of his teen years in Yorkshire, which is where he supposedly picks up the Yorkshire accent, and then he
Okay.
joins the 33rd, the Havercakes in Yorkshire,
Right.
and also in the original books, he talks a lot about Sharpe having black hair, but then
Yeah.
because Sean Bean's blonde, and he stops talking about Sharpe's hair color in the books that he wrote after. So he doesn't say he's got blonde hair or dark hair. He just doesn't say it very much. He doesn't mention it.
Yeah, because in a
Um,
lot of them, most of them, it's always that Richard Sharpe, is really tall. He's the tallest man. He's so tall,
mm,
and he's got black
mm,
hair. Yeah, in most of the early
mm,
novels, that's his description. And Sean Bean obviously hasn't got black hair, and he's not that tall,
yeah,
is he? Sean Bean. I mean, he's not tiny. He's just normal, I think, isn't he? But he's
yeah.
not
He's
sort
like
of
five,
6'3".
5'10", 5'11".
Yeah,
Yeah, well, I think Sharpe's supposed to be about 6 foot, maybe 6'1". But the point, he says like most of the average height of a British soldier then was about 5'6". So he was significantly taller than the other soldiers, but
so
he's
to be
not.
six
He says
one, right? Yeah,
something like that, 6 foot maybe. And then his sidekick, Sergeant Patrick Harper, who comes into it later, is supposed to be 6'4". So yeah, Sharpe's supposed to be much taller than most of the other enlisted men because they're grown up malnourished, as a lot of them
right.
did.
Yeah.
So that's why they're all kind of stunted and short.
Oh, that's another
So
quick
yeah,
thing to say that in all the Sharp stories, or a lot of them, he's got like these band of his mates that are with him, all the Rifleman Harper and of course, well, all of them, and none of them are in Tiger because it's so much earlier, isn't it?
yeah,
So as we mentioned earlier, there's so much missing from the main sort of classic higher Sharp. Loads of
yeah,
it is missing. It's all stripped away for this.
yeah,
But there was
yeah.
one thing I wanted to say. That there's one of the middle novels, and it does mention somewhere when he comes across Hakeswill, he does mention something really specific, like he had me whipped when we were in India. He got me flogged in
Oh yeah,
India,
yeah,
and
yeah.
so there was definitely that. That was definitely
Yeah,
in
the
there.
story was set. Yeah, the story was set.
Obadiah and a blackguardly officer called Morris once beat near to death a native Indian for sport, till I stopped him. They blamed me for it, and I was flogged. Watch him, Pat. He preys on the men. He'll snaffle kit, belts, frogs, haversacks, all entered up found lost by Obadiah, which leads to floggings lest he gets paid. Then wives. He beats men till the wives come to him, which I call rape. I've seen his like before. An evil man marching in a cloud of pipe clay. And because he kicks up salutes, obeys every officer, is bomb-proof to all but us, who's come up from the ranks who are smart to him.
We are that.
And even in the stuff like where at the end of this book, where he kills the Tippoo Sultan himself,
Hmm.
that was part of
Spoiler
the
alert.
Sharpe. That was part of the Sharpe mythology. That's part of the Sharpe story right from the first book, which was Sharpe's Eagle.
Right.
So I think in Sharpe's Eagle, maybe in one of the other ones, someone says, "Oh, that Sharpe, he's the guy who killed the Tippoo Sultan."
Yeah. And quite a lot of the time, for
And he's
some,
got the
sorry,
scars on his back, hasn't he? From the
that's what I was
he's got
just going to
his
say. Yeah.
yeah. So that was that was all kind of set fairly early on. But he says other stuff as well, like they were tortured in the Tippoo's dungeons, and it was Lawford that taught him to read and write in the Tippoo's dungeons, and whilst they listened to the sounds of other men being tortured to death, and Lawford taught him to play chess on the floor, I think it said. And none of that stuff happens in this book. So he kind of had some stuff in mind in the early 80s when he wrote that. But then when he actually came to write the story, I think it was hard for him to work all that stuff in, because it's easy to kind of think in general terms, oh, yeah, he was there and that happened. But then Cornwell's kind of a bit restricted in terms of the timing of the real events, what actually happened, to actually pull it off exactly how he thought he would. So I think that's what happened there.
Yeah, I mean, for all the inconsistencies, I think it's still pretty well done, considering, like you say, the chronology of it, of Cornwell publishing what he did when. It's really well that it hangs together at all, really, isn't it? Yeah, it's that classic thing. Quite often, from time to time, for whatever reason, Sharpe's got his top off, and people see all this scarred up back, and he's always like, he doesn't want to talk about it, or he'll just mention he got flogged in India one time. But yeah, so back to the story. This is straight after the opening sort of bit of action in Sharpe's Tiger, we get into he's got a lady friend, hasn't he? Sharpe's got this lady friend, Mary Bickenstaff, who's the widow of a sergeant. Is it Bickenstaff? What is it?
Bickerstaff.
Bickerstaff. And she's apparently mixed race, and so he's sort of got to look after her, because if he doesn't, she's in trouble, moving with this army of vagabonds. So she's sort of like his charge, and he's got to look after her. And one of the first things it says is that Sharpe is thinking of deserting, thinking of running away, which is kind of interesting, funny, and a bit counterintuitive, because the main Sharpe that everyone would have already been used to is just a soldier through and through. He would never desert, So it's funny to subvert your expectations a little bit, to see the 22-year-old Sharpe out in India thinking about deserting straight away.
Yeah, because he says in that he was fairly happy as a soldier, but he was a bit bored. But then ever since Hakeswill became his sergeant, he just made his life hell. So he couldn't see a way out, basically, just suffering under the tyranny of a sergeant who can do anything to you. So yeah, I mean, you get to a point where your choices are, suffer here or take your chances, really. Yeah. Cornwell made a good kind of what Cornwell's really, really good at doing is giving his characters hard choices where you've got there's no obvious decision, where the characters are faced with a choice between something not ideal and something else not ideal, and they kind of struggle over it. Sometimes it's really, really well done, and sometimes it's a bit kind of forced. And I think it feels a little bit forced in this one, where he's thinking of deserting, but later on in the book, where he's thinking of joining, where he's always getting offered other chances to join another enemy army or join some other force, isn't he? And that's what happens here when he's thinking whether or not to run, and he's thinking about, because it's Hakeswill's planning to. Hakeswill tells Sharpe that he's going to sell Mary Bickerstaff to Nasty Naig, the brothel keeper who follows the army. Yeah, and that's why Sharpe's thinking he can't see a way out, so he's planning on running.
Because Sharpe knows that Hakeswill's got it in from him, because straight at the beginning, Hakeswill tries to replace the flint in his musket, and then tries to get him brought up on charges, and it fails. And then after that, Hakeswill just sort of takes him aside in the night, doesn't he? And just goads him into punching him, saying, I'm going to get your missus raped, basically. Really. I'm going to get her turned into a prostitute, and she's going to be raped for a week, and then she'll be completely pliant, and that's what's going to happen. And what are you going to do about it? I dare you to punch me. That's the kind of guy Hakeswill is, right? That's what happens. And then Sharpe does lose his temper and break his nose, doesn't he? Something like that.
Yeah, he does. It's a setup, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's a setup. There's actually an officer watching, isn't there? So.
Yeah, and that leads Sharpe to be brought up on charges for striking a sergeant,
which is a flogging offence.
Yeah, and then
flogging offence, sir, says so in scripture.
Yeah, and then he gets sentenced to 2,000 lashes. 2,000 lashes? Yeah,
2,000 licks of the cat, which is ridiculous,
yeah.
right? I mean, 50 lashes could be death, couldn't it?
Yeah.
Well,
I
in
think
those
the
days, before penicillin, any open wound could get infected and you could die. So one lash could be death. But 50 is like extreme punishment, isn't it? 100 would be considered near death, if not a death penalty. And like 200 or 500 is certainly death. I mean, you'd be flogging a skeletal back by that point, wouldn't you? The man had been long dead if you took 500
Yeah.
lashes. So 2,000 is
Well,
ridiculous.
the maximum sentence for flogging was 1,200.
Fucking hell! In real life.
They could
No.
in real life you
No.
couldn't be sentenced to anything above that. But I've got a quote here about flogging. So I'm reading this from the Sharpe's Companion, the early years, and it says sentences varied from 25 to 1,200 lashes, which was calculated to kill, or at the very least permanently disable. It was normally reserved for desertion to the enemy, robbery with violence, or striking an officer. Only 10 such awards were made during the Peninsular War, whereas over 50 men received 1,000 lashes. And in the novel, he says this, doesn't he? A surgeon was always present and could halt the punishment if he considered the man close to death, but this was only a postponement, as the culprit had to receive the remainder in one or more instalments when pronounced fit. In theory, if a soldier died under the lash, the sentence was to be completed on his lifeless corpse. And yeah, the drummer boys were the ones who carried out the flogging.
That's medieval, isn't it? Like you're whipping a dead body, like maybe hundreds more times. Like what the fuck?
Yeah, like you said,
and the boys do it, don't they? Sorry.
Yeah, the drummer boys do it. Yeah, apparently every drummer boy was supposed to carry a cat o' nine tails in his pack, and like what happens in Sharpe, there are 3 of them, I think, because there's so many lashes to be given that it's too much effort for one person to do it. So
isn't there a description in one of the other novels, or maybe when Harper gets flogged or someone else gets flogged? It's not in Tiger, but it's in another one where the boys that are doing it, the 2 boys, are just like completely exhausted, like utterly exhausted in the sun, out there for hours, and what a harrowing thing to get a 14 or 15 or 16-year-old boy to whip a man to death in front of hundreds of other men and officers. That's quite a weird, harrowing thing, and that if the boys weren't whipping hard enough, they themselves could get punished, or would certainly be, just chewed out in front of everyone. Like the colonel or a senior officer would be like, "Damn your eyes, you're not whipping him hard enough. You've got to really cut him up." Like it's really quite a medieval thing, isn't it? And one of the things they say,
it's not that long ago. No, I was going to say it's not actually that long ago in terms of time, but the brutality of that period is so off the charts compared to now. It's a completely different world.
Also that in the East India Company regiments and in the sepoy regiments, they didn't do that. It was only in the King's Army, the
they didn't whip the Indians.
That they did that.
Yeah, they didn't whip the Indians. Yeah, which is interesting. They were treated better, paid half as much, but they didn't get whipped.
But you got paid more in the East India Company, right?
No. Oh yeah, sorry. The pay was better, but not for the sepoys.
Right.
So the sepoys got paid less than the King's troops. But we talked about a sentence of hundreds of lashes was effectively a death sentence. But there's an account here of a Sergeant Thomas Maybury of the 95th Rifles, and he was sentenced to 700 lashes for gambling with £200 of public funds, which had been entrusted to him to buy necessaries for his men. So when Maybury was tied up, he was offered, as was then customary, the option of banishment instead, and he refused. And incredibly, Maybury took his punishment of 700 lashes without a murmur. It says Maybury was a man of immense strength and courage, and he almost won back his stripes when in the breach at Badajoz in the Peninsular Campaign. He said his company commander was so impressed by his actions, he had killed 7 of the enemy in the breach, that his commander ordered him to the rear with the promise of making him a sergeant again. But Maybury, although covered in blood from several wounds, refused to retire. But then he was killed with a sword cut that split open his skull. So yeah, that guy,
Bloody hell.
some massive beefy sergeant, just took 700 lashes. But yeah, like in the story, Sharpe takes 200, like 202, I think, and his back is split open so much that you can see his ribs and stuff.
Yeah.
And realistically, like, as you say, that's very, very likely to become infected in India, especially under the treatment of the regimental doctors, which were the regimental surgeons rather, who didn't really know how to treat wounds or keep them clean or anything.
Well, it's 1799, so there's no sort of germ theory of disease yet, really. Certainly no penicillin or anything.
No, you always see in these stories where the people are told to keep the bandages wet, aren't they? Make sure you wet the bandages. That's their instructions.
Right.
Keep the bandages wet. I don't know if that actually does anything or not. Probably not. But Cornwell makes it so that Sharpe eventually gets treatment by an Indian doctor who actually treats him properly and gives him some sort of ointment.
Some kind of salve.
Yeah, some kind of salve. Yeah, rather than just pouring brandy over it or whatever.
So Hakeswill goads Sharpe into breaking his nose, which an officer who's in on it sees. And so he's brought up on charges, and the commanding officer, is it a Morris, Major Morris or Captain Morris or something? I think he pops up in other ones, who's also a bastard like Hakeswill and just kind of despises his own men and is happy to just hand down 2,000 lashes. And I think there's even a gasp around the tent when he says 2,000 lashes. And so there's the scene where Sharpe is lashed and or flogged. And it gets up to about 200 when proceedings are interrupted by one Colonel Arthur Wellesley, who comes into the story for the first time. And so anyone who knows, Arthur Wellesley goes on to become the first Duke of Wellington. This is the first time, and he crops up in quite a lot of the stories. I wouldn't nowhere near all of them, right? But it's always a treat when Cornwell lets you see Wellesley himself or Napoleon. Sometimes there's scenes with Napoleon occasionally, aren't there, in some of the later ones. And so anyway, we're treated to Arthur Wellesley straight away, almost in Tiger.
Yeah, he's in it quite a lot actually, isn't he?
Yeah.
And he's a colonel, so it's one of his first opportunity to make a name for himself, because it's his brother is the governor of India, right? Or he's governor of
Yeah. I've got a quote. I've only got 2 or 3 quotes, but I've got one here from Tiger. Can I quickly do it?
Oh right, yeah.
So Wellesley turns up on the sort of parade ground where Sharpe is getting flogged. It says, quote, "The colonel was a thin young man with a narrow face, hard eyes, and a prominently beaked nose. Many older men resented that the 29-year-old Wellesley was already a full colonel, but he came from a wealthy and titled family, and his older brother, the Earl of Mornington, was Governor-General of the East India Company's British possessions in India. So it was hardly surprising that the young Arthur Wellesley had risen so high so fast." Yeah, end quote. So yeah, that's the first time Cornwell gives us the Duke of Wellington. And of course, the historical, he was really there, so this is where Cornwell sort of really quite expertly intersects real history.
Yeah, because he does this in his other stories as well, in his other series, where he's kind of, not quite, but it's almost about Wellington, really, because it's about the Peninsular Campaign. And it's Sharpe is kind of attached to Wellington throughout his career. So it's a way of telling the story of Arthur Wellesley as a general, but through this fictional character Richard Sharpe. And he does that in the Saxon, in the Last Kingdom series as well, where he tells the story of Alfred through another fictional warrior. It's quite a clever way of doing it, because you get to experience it. It would be a very, very different book if you told the story of Wellington through the eyes of Wellington, right? It would be much more boring, for one thing.
Yeah.
But that's kind of what he's doing, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, the fact that the original Sharpe series was, well, really exclusively the Peninsular War, that just speaks of a massive Wellington fan, doesn't it?
Yeah, and the rifles as well, because the rifles where Richard eventually becomes a lieutenant in the 95th Rifles, and the story of the rifles, the Green Jackets, is really the same as the story as the same story as the Peninsular War itself, because they were really only really existed during that period, during that campaign. Well, that's when they were at their height, and they were kind of disbanded afterwards. So it's
So that's
all
one
tied
other
up with it as
thing
well.
I would say for people that aren't that initiated with Sharpe, that Sharpe is the 95th Rifles. He's in the 95th Rifles, and he's just so synonymous with the 95th. There's many stories where like the honour of the 95th is on the line, or he's going to get expelled from the 95th, and it's the worst thing ever. And so, yeah, the 95th Rifles, the Green Jackets, they wear literally green jackets instead of the famous red jackets. And so that's a massive part of Sharpe's character, his personality, his identity. And so, yeah, Sharpe and the 95th, that's the two things that go together. But in these prequels, when he's not even in the 95th, is he? He's in the 33rd Regiment of Foot, the light company of the 33rd
Yeah.
Regiment of Foot. So yeah, that is something again that is a bit different to the main body of the Sharpe stories. Yeah, but yeah, it's completely in the first case. I think Sharpe was just supposed to be. I would have thought. Do you disagree that he was just supposed to be contained within the Peninsular War, and that was it? I mean, maybe Cornwell probably always thought he would end it with Waterloo, perhaps, but that's very soon after the Peninsular War in real life, isn't it? So that follows on.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And that's and taking him out of that is so he hasn't got his men, he hasn't got his sidekick Sergeant Harper, he hasn't got his rifle, he hasn't got his cavalry saber, he hasn't got his rank. So without all that, he does feel a bit stripped back, you know. But yeah, so he gets saved by Wellington, and then because
it's a bit of a Deus Ex Machina moment, isn't it? Because Wellington also says that that's enough. He doesn't have to suffer the other 1,800 lashes, and he's sort of whisked off to the general's tent, the big General Harris, Lieutenant General Harris, and all the other men, and Hakeswill, of course. Everyone else is aghast. Like, why would a general want a private who's just been up on charges for striking a sergeant? What the hell would Colonel Wellesley and the general want with this scoundrel?
Yeah, because it's one of the characters. I don't know if is it Baird or someone has got an idea about needing to reconnoiter the city of Seringapatam before
McCandless the spy
army gets there. Oh, it's McCandless, right?
McCandless the spy, the Scottish spy, has been captured, and he's in the jail, the dungeons of Seringapatam, and they need to get in and either help him escape or just get the information that he's got about Seringapatam's defences. Either just get the information or ideally get him out, and they need the best around. They need the best of the best, damn it. And some of the top senior brass know somehow that Private Sharpe is the man. Well, it comes into, there's a character called Lawford. It comes to Lawford. Yeah. So you want to talk about him? He comes into it.
Yeah. So there's young Lieutenant Lawford, who's 22, but is he a nephew of McCandless? Is that the idea?
Yeah, he's his nephew meant to be. Yeah.
Yeah. So they give Lawford the opportunity to go in and rescue him, or Lawford volunteers for it basically, but they say he hasn't got a hope by himself. He needs to go with someone else. And then Lawford says he won't do it with any other man than Sharpe, because Lawford has just seen Sharpe in action and just admires his his cunning and his confidence and his ability as a soldier.
Yeah, for some reason, Lawford seems to almost fancy Sharpe, or at least have a bro crush on him. For some reason, it doesn't really explain it, but he just says there was no question in Lawford's mind who he would pick. Okay. He just sort of says he just admires Sharpe's soldiering, and he's the tallest man. He's the strongest, tallest, best soldier. So yeah, I guess already somehow Private Sharpe has caught the eye of this Lawford, who's actually a really endearing character, isn't he, Lawford?
Yeah.
He's more endearing than Sharpe. That's one of the things I want to say, is that Sharpe is a bit of an arsehole. He's a bit of a brutal character. He's not completely nice, but that
Well, no,
makes him for a great character.
he's an actual murderer. Like
Well, yeah,
he
a thief and a
murders.
murderer, yeah.
Yeah, he murders multiple people throughout the series. Like I can't remember how many murders he does, but yeah, he murders quite a few people. Not just killing people in battle, of which he kills hundreds, maybe thousands. He plans and commits murder multiple times, and but yeah, he's still a really likable character because he only murders he only murders bad guys, so it's all right.
Mm.
You know, he's got a real moral core. You know, he's got a consistent morality, and it doesn't necessarily have much to do with the law or the rules of the army. It's just his own personal sense of what's right and wrong. I think that's what makes him endearing, and people kind of can get on board with the fact that he breaks the rules and kills people and stuff, because he's doing it for moral reasons, basically, for his own moral reasons.
One of the things that I think makes Sharpe quite endearing, even though he's unpleasant in many ways, is his sort of honesty, or his, I don't know, authenticity maybe. He'll just be really honest about like who he is and what he does. You know, there's one point in this story actually when later on where someone asks him if he's a spy, and you expect him to prevaricate or lie or something, and he's just like, yeah, I am, yes, I know you know. Things like that are classic Sharpe, aren't they? Like ridiculously forthright. But again, there's something quite endearing about that, even if the forthrightness reveals something quite ugly. It's real, at least.
Yeah, it's the fact that he's a fish out of water as well. He doesn't really fit in anywhere. He doesn't really fit in anywhere other than the army. But even then, he doesn't fit in the army really. He's only really happy when he's leading a company of troops against the enemy off somewhere else. There's one things in one line in the TV show that they put in. I don't think it's in any of the books, but it's the character, it's the exploring officer or someone that they get in to replace Brian Cox, and he says to Sharpe of swanning about the countryside like a pirate, and that kind of sums up what is the essential Sharpe really, is that he's only really happy when he's off doing something like trying to track down a French spy or stolen gold or something like that, or sneaking into an enemy city away from authority. You know, he sort of chafes under the leadership of idiots and fools and stuff. That's what is. Go on.
Yeah, I think the quintessential Sharpe, the thing that sort of defines Sharpe, is that he'll stand and fight. There's one classic line when he's up on charges at some point and it looks hopeless. He's up on charges quite often, isn't he? And Harper says something like, "What will you do?" And he turns and says, "I'll do what I always do. I'll stand and fight." I feel like that's the sort of classic Sharpe thing. Yeah, he's just a brutal bastard who will fight for a few pennies for the king. Yeah.
Well, that's a key thing in this, isn't it? He's trying to find reasons for doing what he's doing, and he's given multiple opportunities in this to actually desert for real. And he's got, when he goes into Seringapatam with Lawford, there's the French colonel, is it Gudin?
Yeah.
And he's basically saying you can join the Tippoo's army, and you can be a lieutenant in this army, and you could continue to get promotion, which you'll never get in the British army. He's kind of tempted because he's thinking, what am I doing? You know, what am I doing this for? You know, he joined up because he didn't have a choice. He joined up to get out of something. I think he was. I don't know if he was given the choice by a magistrate, or if he was trying to get away from. He'd like committed a murder, and he was trying to get away from the crime, so he signed up or whatever. And he was just 16, and then he's thinking, why? You know, should I continue to be a soldier, or am I going to just continue to be a private, a redcoat forever until I get killed or whatever? So he's wrestling with that. What's his reasons for doing it? What's his reasons for staying? And he's given multiple opportunities to actually betray his uniform and his king and stuff, and he repeatedly decides not to. And by the end of it, he's kind of he's become comfortable with the idea of, no, I am a soldier. I'm a redcoat, and that's what I am. And he kind of embraces that identity, doesn't he? By the end of it, even though he's still got, that's the thing, he's got this ambition to be something more, which gradually grows in him. It kind of gradually grows, and he kind of, when he's a private, someone says to him, I think Mary Bickerstaff says, you could be a sergeant. You know, if you're a sergeant, you could have this and this and this. And he's like, oh, I can be a sergeant. I'm just an idiot. I'm not, you know. But then when he starts to think about it, he starts to decide, yeah, I do want to be that. That is what I want. And then when he's a sergeant, he's like thinking, oh, I don't want to be a sergeant. Like this is pointless. I want to be an officer. And then when he's a lieutenant, he starts thinking, like, I'm bored of being a lieutenant. This is rubbish. This is no kind of life for a 32-year-old man. I need to be at least the captain. And when he becomes a captain, he's got this. His ambition continues to grow throughout his career, which I think is a really core part of his personality. He's got this strange kind of massive chip on his shoulder.
Yeah, because
never goes away.
As we said, he sort of came from a foundling home and was some sort of convict, given the option to join the army instead of being incarcerated, and can't read and write, at least to begin with. So yeah, he's got a big chip on his shoulder, and it's in Tiger that he's sort of, I think, forced to stare inside himself, and what he sees is that by the end that he is a redcoat. I think there's even a line where someone says, you know, where are your allegiances really? And he says, I'm a redcoat, I reckon. I think that's just a line where he says that. It is a really good introduction to the character. Like, if you didn't know anything about Sharpe at all, you could still just pick up Tiger and go with it. It wouldn't be a problem at all, I don't think.
And obviously it's Cornwell's genius that his character is consistent. Even though he's stripped away and he hasn't got all the core Sharpe elements in this story, it is still great that you can see someone go from a 22-year-old private through to the end of the series when he achieves everything that he does throughout it. It is great to go right back and see him as this. It is good. So he ends up. So Lawford demands that he'll only go into Seringapatam with Sharpe, and then they both pretend to desert in order to get picked up by the Tippoo's men and taken into the. So they're going to pretend to desert and pretend to want to join up with the Tippoo's men, and then hopefully they'll be taken into the city, and then they'll be able to get a message from this exploring officer, spy basically, Colonel McCandless, and then get a message out to the British forces to tell them about the state of the defences. Basically, I think that's right, isn't it?
Yeah, it's sort of quite a shaky plan. I mean, it's almost a suicidal mission. There's this Colonel McCandless, a Scottish senior officer who's basically a spy, who knows that the British army shouldn't attack from the west. I think it's from the west. Whatever you do, don't attack from the west. That's the intel. That's the intelligence that he knows. And so this Lieutenant Lawford and Sharpe are going on a 2-man mission behind enemy lines. I mean, it's crazy, really. It's stupid, really. And the senior officers say they expect to never see them again when they disappear off into the night. And their story is that they're just deserting because Sharpe's just been flogged, and his sort of backstory would be, you know, I'm not standing for that. I'm not going to be flogged again. Bugger this for a game of soldiers. I'm deserting. But it's, of course, incredibly risky and, crazily risky. But, I mean, that's the story. And, and so they want to get picked up by the enemy soldiers and go over to their side. So it's all a bit, what's the word? It's bordering on the unbelievable, you know, when you're asked to suspend your disbelief when you read a book or watch a movie or something. And it's getting a bit close to getting to the raggedy edge there for me. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree. It's ridiculous. Yeah, there's no way they would sanction a plan like that. But yeah, because Cornwell kind of shines a light on it, doesn't he? He says like, Baird says to Wellesley, "That's the last you'll ever see of him," or something. That at the end of the scene when they're disappearing, it's just like there's no way
Yeah.
that would ever work. Like that's just absurd. Like they would get killed immediately, or if they didn't get killed immediately, they would never be able to get out again. Because how would you?
Mhm.
Like it's absurd. Oh, the idea is they've got a contact in the city, isn't there? There's a merchant,
That's it, yeah.
a named merchant they need to find, and he can get a message out. That's the idea, isn't it? This merchant can get a message out to the British Army, but even that is like they don't even know how to how to find this guy or anything. So
Yeah, they call him Apparao. He's just a fictional character.
Apparal, yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, so they get picked up, Lawford and Sharpe. Oh, and Mary Bickerstaff comes along with them,
Yeah.
making it ridiculously more dangerous or fraught with danger. But they do get sort of picked up by the Tippoo's men, and you see the general, the French colonel, and taken inside the city. And it's when you first see Tippoo. Well, actually, he's been introduced in the book, but it's the first time Sharpe sees the Tiger of Mysore himself.
Yeah.
One of the other quotes, just a real quick few lines. Cornwell writes, quote, "At their head was a shortish, plump man, maybe 50 years old, with a round face and a neatly trimmed black moustache. He was dressed in a white silk tunic, above white silk leggings and black leather boots. But the simple clothes glittered with jewels. He wore rubies on his turban, diamond-studded bangles on his arms, and pearls were strewn onto his blue silk sash, from which were hung a sapphire-studded scabbard in which rested a sword with a golden hilt fashioned into the face of a snarling tiger." End quote. That paints quite a picture. And apparently the real Tippoo Sultan was, like that, just bejeweled. And
Yeah.
so
A
maybe
short,
just
fat man with a little moustache. Yeah.
and a tyrant, I think, like quite sadistically violent, because Cornwall goes to quite extreme lengths to describe his jetties, his like personal strongmen who execute people by twisting their heads round and weird things like that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, and when Sharpe later witnesses one of those executions, he thinks to himself, actually, it's a lot quicker than the hangings that we do back in Britain. Like the jetties, these big Indian strongmen, like slap a huge nail through someone's skull or
Oh,
twist
yeah.
their neck around to break their neck or whatever. And he thinks, well, it's quicker than watching someone sort of strangled to death, dangling over the
Or
scaffold.
taking hours to be flogged to death, like
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
1,200 licks of the cat that take a couple of hours or more. I mean, that's
yeah.
so much more distressing than they describe a few times that these jetties will make you kneel down, put a big nail with a big flat round head of the nail, place that like on the top of your head, and then slap it with all their might down into your head as a form of execution. Like, how weird is that? But
Yeah.
there's a few scenes, I think 2 or even 3 scenes in Tiger where you get to see these jetties like twisting people's heads off and doing the nail slap thing.
Yeah, yeah. He describes them as like these huge men with like huge muscles and they're just wearing loincloths basically, and they're all oiled and stuff, and they've got their long hair and long beards, and they're all oiled and well fed.
Now,
And
at
yeah,
one
and they
point, it seems almost cartoonish. He says they just juggle with cannonballs or like throw a man around like a rag doll. Just
yeah,
pick him up in
yeah,
the
they
air and
throw a
throw
man
it
up.
between them like a ball.
Yeah, yeah. That yeah. When I read that bit, he says they toss a man up into the air, and I was like, well, no, no one could do it. Like, I don't know. Could Brian Shaw do that? Could Brian Shaw toss a man into the air? Maybe.
Maybe like when Kane or the Undertaker would pick up X-Pac, like pretty much just pick him up. Yeah, like a 6'8" guy could pick up a 5'6" guy, I reckon.
Maybe. Have you seen Brian Shaw doing like the keg tossing? Like, how much do those kegs weigh? Those kegs must weigh probably the big ones must probably weigh a fair bit.
Or what if you get
Yeah.
like an actual world's strongest man type guy? What's the British guy called?
Yeah,
Eddie Hall.
Eddie Hall, yeah, Eddie Hall.
Eddie Hall could pick up a 5'4" bloke that weighs 110 pounds. He could probably just pick him up and throw him around, I reckon.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know about throw him around, but I mean that is
you could
like
heave
the
him
top
up into the air. You could heave him to
0.001% of strongest men ever to have lived, though. So I don't know.
Yeah, with massive amounts of PEDs.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know.
But these jetties, anyway, the Tippoo's jetties are supposed to be like just this terrifying monsters, aren't they? That's the point.
Yeah, I don't know to what extent they're made up by Cornwell and to what extent they actually existed, because I'm not.
I think they existed.
Sure.
I
think
they
did exist, but yeah, I think they did exist, but I'm not exactly sure if they were exactly as Cornwell described them. I'm not sure. I've looked into it, but yeah, the Tippoo did execute a lot of people. He did execute a load of British soldiers, didn't he? So in the story we see about, I think there's about 18 or 20 grenadiers get captured later in the story, and they get executed by the jetties, don't they? And I think that did happen. I think something like that did happen just before the British Army attacked. So he was the Tippoo. In the Cornwell's historical note at the end of the story, he says the Tippoo was like an educated man and a religious man, and he had scruples, and he was a good soldier and stuff like that. He's a kind of at pains to say that he wasn't evil, but he was. He also goes on. He explains a lot in the book how the Tippoo is a Muslim ruling over Hindus. It was his father, wasn't it, Hyder Ali, who basically usurped the throne, right? So there was a Hindu royal family, and Hyder Ali was a soldier who basically took power and then passed that power on to his son. So there was still a Hindu royal family that was just made powerless basically by this short-lived dynasty. So he wasn't exactly a legitimate ruler. He basically, his father had taken power and he'd carried it on. So it's not like he was much more legitimate than the British, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's the sort of territory of Mysore, which, as I say, is in sort of central southern India, and Hyder Ali was a Muslim from much further north in India. The indigenous people, if you like, of the Mysore region were largely Hindu, and Cornwell goes to lengths or mentions a couple of times, more than once, that Tippoo Sultan speaks Persian, and which obviously isn't indigenous to southern India. And so he's like a usurper. His family were usurpers. They actually kept that royal family alive. This war in 1799 is, as we said earlier, the fourth Anglo-Mysore War, and the other ones, or the other three, all took place not long before, all in a generation before. And one of them, we defeated Tippoo Sultan, but allowed him to stay. We'd keep him as a puppet. But then he wasn't playing ball, so then we had to go and defeat him for a second time. So there'd been English army or British armies besieged Seringapatam, like 8 years earlier or 10 years earlier, successfully.
Yeah.
But I suppose like Saddam, when in the first Gulf War, we defeated Saddam the first time, but didn't actually remove him. And so 10 years later, it's still an issue. So it's sort of like that. But he was never, he wasn't completely legitimate. That's certainly, a good point to make. So Lawford and Sharpe have been taken into custody inside Seringapatam, and the Tippoo Sultan personally and his entourage of these giant executioners, the jetties, walk in, and they see these new captives, European captives. And there's the scene, isn't there, where the Tippoo sort of tests Sharpe's loyalty by getting him to shoot. They bring out McCandless himself, don't they? And he gets Sharpe to shoot him point blank in the head.
Yeah. So it's to prove they want these new deserters to prove their loyalty by shooting a British officer, and Sharpe takes the opportunity, basically, doesn't he? He takes the weapon, points it at McCandless, and pulls the trigger. So the Tippoo himself, or one of his men, loads the musket, right?
That's right, yeah.
And they're watching, and Sharpe's watching the musket being loaded, and he sees that the powder is blowing away on the wind, and he can see that it's not actually gunpowder, it's
or he can
pepper
even
or something.
smell that it's not right. It wouldn't.
Yeah,
it wouldn't,
he licks his finger. He touches it and licks his finger. It doesn't taste salty, so he knows that it's not. He knows that it's not real gunpowder, and he suspects that he's being tested. So he goes through the mime of pretending to shoot him, and then later on, McCandless says, "Did you know?" or something like that, and he says, "Yeah, I could tell that it wasn't gunpowder." And he says, "What would you have done if it had been gunpowder?" And Sharpe says, "I'd have bloody shot you."
Yeah.
McCandless says, "Good man."
It's good, isn't it, that bit?
Yeah.
Stiff upper lip all round.
Yeah.
It's funny, actually, at this point, one of the only times I probably want to diverge and talk about the TV adaptation. In the later ones we do of these, probably talk a lot more about the TV episode of that novel. But because in this one, they do something a bit weird, where they take all three of the prequels that are set in India and sort of mash them together to make one screenplay, and they have Sean Bean playing it when he's older, and so they rewrite the screenplay a bit and mash together all these prequels, and they call it Sharpe's Challenge. So there's no Sharpe's Challenge the novel, there isn't one of those, but there is a TV feature length TV thing, where Sean Bean and Dara O'Malley are in India when they're in their sort of 40s. But that scene they've rewritten so that it's Sharpe and Harper. Sharpe's forced to shoot Harper in the face.
Right.
And it doesn't go off, and it's really a test of loyalty, sort of a thing. But anyway, that's one of the only real times I really want to bring up that, because it's not that great, Sharpe's Challenge. What do you think?
Yeah, I haven't watched it. I was going to watch it, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. So it looked so bad and so wrong, because so they finished the original series, and then it was 10 years later they made Sharpe's Challenge. And I remember at the time it coming out, and I remember thinking, "Oh, I'm not going to bother, because it's just wrong." They're just trying to. Yeah, I just knew it wouldn't be good, so I thought I'm not gonna bother watching it, and so I haven't seen it. So
yeah, it's pretty contrived. It's like Colonel Sharpe is brought out of retirement personally by Wellesley, who needs him to go over to India and rescue a British agent who is in fact Harper.
Right.
And his disguise is that he's been busted down to a sergeant or something, and he's got to go over there and and as I say, they mash together at least the first two, or maybe the first three. But there's you see Sergeant Bickerstaff in it, which you don't see in Tiger. He's already dead when Tiger opens. You never see Bickerstaff, stuff like that, because they have to replace Hakeswill, because in the TV universe, Hakeswill's already, that storyline's done with. Don't want to ruin anything there. But
then they make the baddie. Maybe it's in the other one they do of this, the final TV film, where the baddie turns out to be Hakeswill's son, just randomly. Yeah, which is just ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. But yeah, I mean, as far as the TV series goes, that was my original introduction to Sharpe. Probably same as for a lot of people.
Me too. I remember seeing Sharpe's Rifles. Yeah. That was the first one I saw. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, it was the first one, and that was the first one, and it was about 92, 93, something like that. So we'd have been in our early teens, right? And it was like perfect TV for a 13-year-old, 14-year-old boy, or whatever we were, because it's just brilliant adventure. It's just, you've got all the fighting and Sharpe's women. Yeah, it's just perfect. I remember thinking maybe like our parents' generation, our dad's generation was they had like Sean Connery's James Bond was their kind of like the guy's thing, right? It was like you had the adventure and the birds and the exotic locations and all that kind of stuff. But then we had Sharpe, basically. It was kind of like the same sort of thing, really, isn't it? It's the same kind of same ingredients in a new package where you've got just this awesome main character that, but better than Bond because it's historical. That's what I think anyway. And it was yeah, just brilliant. Just loved all of them. There was like 2 or 3 of these a year, weren't there? 2 or 3 of these Sharpe movies a year, right? So there's about 10 of them. I can't remember really, but and they're about 2 hours long, something like that. I just remember loving them so much. They're just fantastic. And after seeing them, that's what made me start reading the books. And I think I started reading them out of order. Like I probably got them from the from charity shop or whatever.
Yeah.
Just like picked up Sharpe's whatever, and then started reading it. I didn't know what the hell was going on, and then gradually kind of built up a collection of the actual books until I could finally read them in some sort of order. And it wasn't until the prequels had come out. One Christmas, I got a present, probably about, I don't know, 2005, 6, something like that. My mother-in-law bought me the whole collection of the paperbacks, and then I started from the start and read them all through in order.
Nice.
That was brilliant. Yeah. But yeah, definitely the TV movies, the films were what brought me into this world and started me reading Bernard Cornwell, and then from Bernard Cornwell I started reading other historical fiction and started also the TV shows were really, really important for me. And yeah, I just couldn't face watching the kind of cobbled together version that they made 10 years later, just to kind of as a cash in basically. So I just didn't bother.
Yeah, I know what you mean. A really similar experience. I remember the first time Sharpe's Rifles came on, and I was sort of transfixed immediately. And yeah, I don't know how old I was, but maybe we were like 13 or 12 or something like that. And I've heard them described as sort of hornblower on land. I think I've heard Cornwell himself say that. But the different hornblowers are such a goody. He's really saccharine sweet is old Hornblower, and Sharpe, like, as we say, is a bit of a brigand in many ways. And I think maybe you said this many years ago. You said it's like Mills and Boone, but for boys. Almost like the fetishization of battles and stuff. And and quite often there's like a buxom lady that Sharpe snogs fairly regularly. It's all very PG. But yeah, it's just great stuff. But sometimes when I like you saw the TV stuff first, and only when I sort of become an adult really read the novels. I haven't read every single one. I will the few I haven't, I will be reading before we do an episode on it. But yeah, I remember just nearly all my collection are from charity shops. You see, oh, Sharpe's Prey, that's rare. I haven't got that. It's like 99p, and it's an old battered copy with an utterly destroyed spine. Yeah, I'll pick that up. But yeah, so where were we? Oh yeah, so the Sultan just lets them be in his army. He just sort of accepts Sharpe and Lawford's story and accepts that scene when he goes to shoot McCandless in the face, accepts that that's good enough, and they are sort of inducted into his army. Yeah, so it goes from there, doesn't it?
Yeah, the plot of the story really slows down at this point, and it gets a little bit boring where they're not really doing very much. They're just mucking about in the city and learning to be a soldier in the Tippoo's army, getting to know Colonel Gudin. And one of the things that happens in this story and in all the prequels is that Cornwell doesn't do in the later stories, or the ones that he wrote earlier rather, is that the view and the narrative moves away from Sharpe quite often. So it goes to kind of Colonel Gudin, and it goes to Wellesley, and it goes to McCandless, and it goes to Apparel, or whatever the guy's name, the Indian general traitor, and all these other characters. Where in the later books in the series, it's told much closer to Sharpe all the time. It does move around a little bit, but nowhere near to the same extent. So I think he was kind of searching for like Sharpe doesn't really do very much in this story. Obviously, he's got some key things that he does, but he doesn't really move. He doesn't really drive the story like he does in later books. Right. So at this point, there's not really that much. Not much really happens. He's they're trying to get a message out, right? So when he shoots McCandless, he's about to shoot McCandless. When the gun doesn't go off, he pretends to be annoyed and he pretends to hit McCandless with the butt of his musket. And while he's doing that, he whispers to him like, "What's the message?" or whatever. And McCandless says, "Attack anywhere but the west," or whatever it is. And then Sharpe's trying to get that message out. They don't really know how to do it, and then they just kind of forget. And then it's just Sharpe and Lawford getting drunk and visiting whorehouses and stuff while the British siege sort of begins and the guns start battering the walls and there's a scene where Wellesley leads an attack against this between the British Army and the city. There's a what is it? It's like a bank with an aqueduct, right? You've got there's an a line of defence which is an aqueduct, and Wellesley needs to lead the 33rd in an attack on that
A night
to take
attack.
the enemy.
A night attack, isn't it? Famously.
A night attack, yeah.
Because this is a real action, isn't it?
This is a real action. It really happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really happened, and it's Wellesley's only major kind of fiasco that in his entire career.
Yeah.
Yeah. He has a pretty successful career, even when he loses and has to retreat and stuff. He doesn't ever muck up. He's always in control. And this particular night attack that Wellesley led the 33rd to take this. It's not even a proper line of defence. It's not like a load of bastions or proper trenches, or they're not even very, very well defended. It's just the fact that he leads it in the dark, and it wasn't. They didn't really have the information, did they? It's like,
but it was sort of utterly repelled, wasn't it?
It was it was a complete failure, yeah.
And didn't Wellesley always have a hatred of night attacks for the rest of his career because of that?
Yeah, that's what Cornwell says I think he says that in the historical note at the end of the novel, that Wellesley always
I got it from
that point on as the last resort. He just never wanted to do it again because it was so hard to control, and it's the chaos is brilliantly told by Cornwell, where Wellesley personally leads the two flank companies. So the flank companies are the light company and the grenadier company, right? So the light company are the skirmishers that go out in front of the line, basically, to skirmish with the enemy. And the grenadier company is the biggest, hardest, toughest blokes in the regiment that are supposed to be they're both kind of the best men, essentially. Yeah. So Wellesley takes personal command of the two flank companies, and then the rest of the battalion is coming up behind him, I think. And it's not just
in there, isn't he?
Hakeswill's in there. Yeah. It just hiding immediately, like refuses to climb the bank. So they need to attack the aqueduct is you climb up a bank, and there's the aqueduct, and there's a bank on the other side, and the enemy are on the other side of that. So you got to climb up a kind of a slope, cross a kind of a wide and deep elevated river, and then go down the bank on the other side. And all of the companies and they'll get mixed up and they'll get separated, and I think some start firing on each other, and they're just blundering around basically, and some of the companies go off into the woods where they get attacked by the enemy, and they take quite a lot of casualties, and they can't complete the attack, and they can't even withdraw because it's pitch black, there's no moon, and they just get lost. Like almost every company meets with disaster. So there's a character in this who was a real character. What's that lieutenant's name? It's like a young.
Is it the Irish Fitzgerald?
Oh, that's it.
He's like this really charismatic, really nice character that you can't help but like. He's like the counterpoint to Hakeswill in every way. And in the darkness, in the confusion, Hakeswill murders him, doesn't he? There's something that he directly embarrassed Hakeswill slightly by countermanding something in front of the men. And in the darkness, Hakeswill just stabs him up and was like, "You won't embarrass me in front of the men again, will you, sir?" Or something like that.
yeah, pure evil. And I think Lieutenant Fitzgerald was a real guy, and he did die in that attack. I don't know what he was like in terms of his personality, but yeah, he was one of the people that's a real a real character. And so they end up having to
But the big plot, the big plot point at this juncture is that the British shouldn't attack from the west, and the west from the outside appears to be the obvious place to attack. But there's some sort of great reason why you shouldn't do that, which Sharpe needs to get that intel back to the British lines. But how he's pretending to be in the employ of Tippoo Sultan. In fact, there's one bit where they're on the walls and the French colonel makes them shoot at English soldiers with these newfangled rifles that've got a ridiculously long range, and Sharpe just misses, but Lawford hits a guy and kills him. And
he's horrified.
And that's another thing. Just that's just as an example where Cornwall, everything isn't nice and neat. Quite often, like real life. Someone who is sort of immaculately good ends up doing something horrific, sort of almost against their will. That's sort of what wars are like, So it's good stuff. But we find out, I can't remember at what point you find out, but I suppose it's at this point of the book, that there's some sort of massive mine has been placed under the Western Wall, some point of the Western Wall, a giant mine, so that if and when the English or the British get in, it's going to be blown and loads of guys are going to get killed. And so that's really now the story, isn't it, that Sharpe needs to get that info out.
Yeah, and that is something that isn't historically accurate. There was no giant mine. Cornwell's clear about that at the end, isn't he? In his historical note, he says that's something he made up. It doesn't have it wasn't based on anything. It was based on a shell hit
some sort of magazine or something.
Yeah, hit a magazine, a blow up magazine, and so it's not historically accurate. And that's something that's in the story. It's a bit. You have to again suspend your disbelief that there's supposed to be this great danger of this mine that's going to be blown up, but actually it only probably kill about 200 men, maybe 500, and they've got 50,000.
And it would be an absolute last-ditch suicide thing anyway, because after that there's just a yet more giant breach in the wall. So
it would only crater,
it'd only be the last final poke in the eye. Nothing more than that anyway. But it's fictional anyway. But the rest of it apparently is really quite accurate. When we get onto it in a minute, I suppose, the two forlorn hopes and all that stuff.
Yeah. So do you want to go on to that then? When they actually
I suppose so. On the next bit is they go down. There's some fighting in the darkness where Sharpe himself has some sort of fist fight with Hakeswill in the darkness. That bit, and Hakeswill himself gets captured. And they're all in the dungeons of Seringapatam, and there's tigers down there in the cages down in and Hakeswill's down there, and they're in the same cells with McCandless himself. And that's where they say Sharpe doesn't know his letters, he doesn't know how to read, and they've got one page from Revelation ripped out of an old Bible, and they try and teach him his letters. And and at one point they say, "Oh yeah, you're coming on really well," like. As if you could go from being completely illiterate to being able to read like the King James or a page from the Bible, verses from the Bible. You can't. It doesn't work like that, does it? Like, they're actually teaching you the alphabet and things. So how long were they down there? in real life, I think
it's only a few days.
Yeah, it's only a few days. Yeah. Like, in real life, the real historical thing, like they turn up. The British Army turns up in April and they take it in May, so the whole thing's like a month, which is actually no time at all. It's really, in the scheme of things, it's a pushover really. They lose like 1,400 guys in the final event, I think. So it's not nothing. Seeing 1,400 guys killed in an afternoon is in a very small bit of ground is horrific, but in the scheme of things, it's essentially a pushover.
Compared to the stuff that they're going to see in Europe later. It is a pushover, and that's why that's the story of Britain in India. Really, it's because like India is a very it's always been a very, generally speaking, a very martial, warlike subcontinent, right? Like they've before the British turned up for 1,000, 2,000 years they've been at war, and various states invading each other, are just in constant conflict. It's just no different to Europe, but the difference is the technology is very, very different, and then also the organisation and the planning, the strategy is very, very different. And when it's the case of the British versus any of these Indian nations, there's never really much chance they're going to be successful. Obviously, there are some setbacks and stuff. They get pushed back to like about 60 years before this. They lose Calcutta briefly, don't they?
Yeah, I think it was either Hyder Ali or Tippoo Sultan himself in one of the early wars, the second or third Anglo-Mysore War, where they win a big battle. I know it was Tippoo Sultan, I think, just a few years before. There's one battle where he kills over 3,000.
Is that when David Baird gets captured?
Yeah, that's right. That's it. Yeah,
Baird gets wounded. The real general, Major General David Baird gets injured and then taken captive, and he spends 4 years in the Tippoo's dungeons.
Yeah, it's 44 months he spent inside the dungeons of Singarapatam, and he's getting he's got a real vengeance, isn't it? It's real payback time for him.
Yeah,
and that's real. Guy, that's real.
Yeah, it is real, and the real guy is a pretty interesting character, and I think he's portrayed quite well.
It's meant to be a giant bear of a man, giant Scotsman.
Yeah, huge guy. Yeah, huge guy. There's that famous quote. What is it? His mother, when his mother gets told the news that Baird is in the dungeons with a load of other British soldiers, his mother says something like, "I pity the man who's chained up with our Davy," or something like that, because he's just a belligerent giant, basically, and that is the limiting factor in his career. Basically, he's held back by the fact that he's so belligerent, and he's not diplomatic at all. And so when it comes to when this war is won, the governorship, or whatever you call it, of Mysore is given to Wellesley over Baird, because Baird is just
he's not a diplomat, is he?
Yeah, those superiors know that he's just a bit of a bastard.
He's more cut out for wielding a claymore as he
exactly
runs into the breach of a destroyed wall.
Yeah, he physically leads his attack, I think, which is his kind of he's desperate to get revenge on the Tippoo.
Yeah,
and he leads the attack, doesn't he?
Yeah,
he commands the attack. Yeah, it's just amazing that guy was a real guy.
He always resented Wellesley. Set again in Cornwell's own historical note at the end of the novel. It says he was one of the few people that resented. One of the few people to still kind of dislike Wellesley, even after he was clearly shown to be some sort of tactical, strategic genius. He would still be like, no, he's not. He's not all that. I think eventually he said. It says eventually he did say he was great, but only after sort of Waterloo. But yeah, he wasn't a diplomat, so he wasn't a guy cut out to really be a governor of a whole newly created province or anything. He had an incredible life.
Yeah, he was unlucky as well, and he made some bad decisions. And he was also unlucky where he was when Baird was sent to South Africa. He was posted to South Africa after India, and when he was there, he authorized something like a raid on Brazil or something, like completely beyond his authority, basically, and that kind of led to a bit of disgrace. But then he was actually with the army in the peninsula during the retreat, the start of the Peninsula Campaign, and he was just unlucky to be seriously wounded during that retreat. That was like, if he hadn't been wounded, then his career might have continued and he might have found more military success during that campaign. But he was hit with a canister shot and he lost his arm right at the start of the Peninsula Campaign. So that was effectively the end of Baird's military career, which is a shame because obviously he was a good soldier, but he was just unlucky. He just got hit with a canister.
Yeah.
And he had his arm amputated at the shoulder. So yeah, he's an interesting character.
Yeah, canister and grape shot. doesn't give a fig for rank or or standing or anything.
Yeah.
And cut you down. Well, there's this scene, isn't there, when Sharpe and Lawford and McCandless break out of the dungeons where they have to kill a tiger. Sharpe kills a tiger.
That's fantastic. That is written so brilliantly. That whole bit is edge of your seat stuff. That's just classic Cornwell, where he just draws it out. He's got that whole bit where it's Mary Bickerstaff comes to help, doesn't she? And she tosses him a pistol.
Yeah, and it's just out of reach.
Just out of reach. She has to get out of the cage to get it when the tiger's out there. Yeah, the whole bit is it's fantastic. Even though you know what's going to happen, it's still still edge of your seat stuff.
Because just to say about Mary Bickerstaff real quick, because that whole don't you think that whole subplot is a bit odd? Because the story starts, the very first time you see Sharpe, one of the first things you hear about him is that he's with this Mary. And then throughout the story, once they get to Seringapatam, she just sort of disappears off and just starts a new life. Shacks up with some new fella, gets a new name. And then there's some small scene where he meets up with her again and goes, it's all cool. You've got to live your life. There's no worries. And she's like, you're a good man, Richard Sharpe. And he walks away just whistling, almost. And it's like, okay. And then she ends up just helping them later, like at this point in the story, but much later in the story. It's just a bit of a weird thing. I mean,
I like that a lot because everything that is true. Everything you say is true, but I like because he's going to marry her, isn't he? The plan is we'll run away together, we'll get married, and then that's it. We'll be married, and that's it. That's what we're going to do. And then they get separated when they get into the city. Then she goes to someone else's household, and then he's kind of intending to get her and stuff, but he just goes and starts whoring and drinking and stuff. And then when he sees her and she's with this Indian officer, he's jealous of the guy, right? He's like, there's this wealthy, suave Indian guy that Mary's now shacked up with, and he feels like, Jesus, he's just a bit gutted and jealous. And then as he kind of walks away, he sort of thinks, oh, well, easy come, easy go. I think he actually says easy come, easy go or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know, just that again is classic Sharpe. Harper says, I think in one of the books, he's a fool for the women or whatever. And he just falls in love with every pretty woman he meets. But he just gets over them as well, he just, most of them anyway.
Yeah.
So
the women come and go pretty thick and fast.
Yeah. But that was just the way you can just sort of turn it off, like 1 minute he's going to marry her and then she shacks up with someone else. She's like, oh, well, never mind.
And she ends up throwing the pistol down into the dungeons. It's just out of reach. And we get this great scene and where Sharpe it's got one shot to kill this tiger, shoot it right between the eyes. And he does miraculously, and they get out, and that is Sharpe's tiger. I suppose we've got just the sort of the denouement of the novel is the whole breaking of the siege and the breaking of a breach into the wall, blasting a breach in the wall, the outer wall. There's an inner and outer wall, and the whole drama of this giant mine going off or not. Because when Sharpe and Lawford get out, Sharpe's just like, well, I'm going straight to the front trying to help our guys out. It's like really heroic. It's like some of our guys, like hundreds of our guys, might die any second, and we might be able to help. So he just rushes heroically straight towards the scene of action. Yeah, kind of.
Yeah, when they first get out of the dungeon, there's like 4 jetties, isn't there? Like they come to stop him.
Yeah.
And then that
is a bit of a comical scene, that one, don't you think?
Yeah, there's like, oh, come on. But it's still brilliant. It's still actually
because Sharpe just takes on 3 or 4 giants and just fells one immediately. Just like Bruce Lee, just somehow just fells. Sorry, go on. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that's what I was going to say. Just how hilarious it is, because it's basically you just had the scene with the tiger, and it's so it's so kind of tense and realistic because he's so terrified. He's like absolutely terrified of this tiger. And when he gets out of the he picks the lock of his cage and he gets out and he like rushes and grabs the pistol, and then he realizes he didn't ask Mary Bickerstaff if it was even loaded, so he doesn't even know, and he's out there with the tiger now. And then he has to go slowly up to the tiger, and yeah, it's kind of like realistic, really. It's like hyper realistic, and the few seconds are kind of drawn out for pages and pages as you're kind of living this tense moment with him. And then from that he goes out and he just turns into, yeah, it's like a movie, like a superhero, really. It's
Yeah,
like,
where he only shoots the tiger at the last moment. He just closes his eyes, and he's lucky that he hits it. And it's just, as you say, hyper realistic. And then it's just like Roger Moore, just like barely moving and beating up like massive guys with, you know, like what's Casey Ryback, you know,
Steven Seagal, yeah.
Yeah, it's like Steven Seagal, just like absolutely untouchable. Yeah, it's funny.
Yeah, it's still great though. I mean, that's like it's just a great scene because like Sharpe is he's not good at talking to people, but you know he's good at talking to women and sergeants or whatever, but he's not got any other kind of social graces, and he doesn't understand how things work, you know, in the upper classes, and he's got no education. You know, he doesn't know anything apart from fighting, you know, gutter fighting. That's what Cornwell calls it all the time, doesn't he? And then, so yeah, you just kind of get to see Sharpe in his element, where these four jetties just aren't used to anyone attacking him or whatever, and he just sprints at one, and he's like just kick one in the nuts, and then he like jams the musket barrel into another one's face, and then he just wipes him out in like 3 seconds, doesn't he?
I think it's funny. Oh, there's another theme just made me remember you was talking there that runs through all the Sharpe books, and it's certainly present in Tiger right away. Is this idea that privilege, that you're able to buy your commissions in the British Army. So it's just rich people that are leading good soldiers, or this thing that the average soldier is actually really worth something. They're not just a cannon fodder, a piece of meat to be whipped at the slightest infraction. That that whole theme comes up every book, doesn't it?
Yeah. I thought you were going to say the theme of the fact that the enlisted men are scumbags. You know, like there's Wellington's famous "they're the scum of the earth" quote, where and then Cornwell says that, you know, they're the thieves, they're the drunks, and like he says over and over again how most of the men joined just for the rum ration, or because it was that, or deportation, or you know they joined the army. Apart from one or two that join for adventure and then regret it, it's because they've got no other choice, and they are basically the dregs of society. They're if they could do anything else, they would be doing it, but they can't. So the bottom of the rung is to be a soldier, unless you're disabled and on the street or whatever. But at the same time, he shows how they are. He says, you know, if they're well led, if you give them the opportunity, they'll show you how good they are. They'll show you how professional they can be. And in contrast with a lot of the people they face, they're well trained and they're well drilled, and they can follow their orders properly, and they will stand in the face of. They will march towards a battery of artillery that's just blasting them to pieces, and they'll just march straight up to it because they can do it. And you see them kind of humanized as well through the punishments and stuff, and the potential rebellions, and being driven to desertion by evil NCOs and officers and stuff. So it's throughout the series, you're right, it's about the fact that these men are scumbags and if you're not careful, they will just get drunk and thieve and rape and all the rest of it. But on the other hand, they need to be well led, and if they are, then they don't deserve the condemnation of the officers, or the contempt of the officers either, you know.
Yeah, it's really interesting that thing about the scum of the earth and things. But isn't the full line something else that's actually a redeeming? Isn't the full quote actually got a different sentiment to that?
Oh, I don't know. Yeah, possibly. Sure.
But yeah, I mean, these guys are killers, really. Like all soldiers, your job at the end of the day, the bottom line is you kill. You know. So
well, not even Yeah, for these guys, they're not even. Obviously, there is the bayonet charge and stuff where they will march close to an enemy, give them a volley, and then charge at them with their bayonets and have a bit of a barney at close range. But the main thing that they do, that the enemy soldiers, especially like untrained and the militias and the Indians and stuff that they meet, the thing they do is just stand and not run and walk towards enemy fire and stop when they're told to stop, and then fire their muskets and reload and keep firing.
Yeah, like
That's
through
that's
through
that's
danger, fire, shot, and shell to the very walls of hell. We shall
yeah,
stand and we shall stay over the hills and far away. Yeah, that thing. Yeah,
because
like
that's what
moving
really.
forward when you haven't even been ordered to load your muskets yet, and yet guys are getting killed by grape shot, and you've still got to just stand there or move forward, and you've just got to do that. It's mad.
Yeah, like at Waterloo, where for most of the day, for a lot of those regiments, they were just standing there on the hill, taking artillery fire, just getting shredded, and they're just like seeing a line of men next to you and a line of men on your left, a line of men on your right, just getting wiped out by a cannonball, and then you're just standing there waiting for your turn, and then you just stand there because you've been ordered to, and you're not supposed to run away, so you just stand there.
You can even see the
That's
cannonball skipping towards you and stuff. Like,
Yeah, yeah, and you're just supposed to just stand there and take it because you're not allowed to run. That's what made them great, really. That and just firing their muskets, reloading and firing and reloading and firing, but just the courage to stand in the face of all that. It's mad. You can't really imagine it. You can't really imagine how terrible it would be. It's not. There's not really anything comparable. Obviously, they were still trying to do that to some extent in the First World War, but there weren't really any other periods where it was like that. There was just this period of 100 years or so, maybe 200 years. But you're talking about in the medieval period and even in the 17th century, where this kind of English Civil War period, it wasn't like that. You wouldn't just stand there for hours taking fire. The
just
battles were
two
much
massive bodies of
much
men
shorter.
just standing there and just lining up and firing until one quits.
Yeah, and and just marching up a hill towards another lines of men that are just shooting down at you, and you're supposed to just walk through volley after volley until you engage with the enemy. Yeah, you can't really imagine the courage to do that. But yeah, and
Yeah.
Those men who fought in a big battle before. One pace forward. This place is called Talavera. There's going to be a battle here tomorrow. You'll fight in it, maybe even die in it. But you won't see it. There's a lot of smoke in a battle. Our cannon, their cannon. Our shot, their shell. Our volleys, their volleys. You don't see a battle. You hear it. Black powder blasting by the ton on all sides. Black smoke blinding you and choking you and making you vomit. And the French come out of the smoke. Not in a line, but in a column. And they march towards our thin line. Kettle drums hammering like hell, and a golden eagle blazing overhead. They march slowly, and it takes them a long time to reach you. And you can't see them in smoke, but you can hear the drums. And they march out of the smoke, and you fire a volley. And the front rank of the column falls, and the next rank steps over them with drums hammering. And the column smashes your line like a hammer breaking glass. And Napoleon has won another battle. But if you don't run, if you stand until you can smell the garlic, and fire volley after volley, 3 rounds a minute, then they slow down. They stop. And then they run away. All you've got to do is stand and fire 3 rounds a minute. Now, you and I know you can fire 3 rounds a minute. But can you stand?
even worse than that is the charging the breach, which is what happens in this when they make the breach in the wall, and then
yeah. So Sharpe's able to scupper the mine or blow it up early in the story, isn't he? But I'm a bit more interested in the real life events, I suppose, at this stage. And so, yeah, do you want to talk about the Forlorn Hope, what that is?
Yeah, so the Forlorn Hope is this is the attacking company that is the first into the breach. The idea is that they're the ones that are first in. They're gonna take the most damage, and
It's considered
not
suicidal or near suicidal, right?
it's not quite it's not quite suicidal, but you could even expect maybe like 50% casualties or something like that. And you ask for volunteers for the Forlorn Hope, and quite often there'll be a lieutenant, a junior lieutenant, like an ensign or someone like that, a junior officer, or an NCO, maybe a sergeant might lead it, and their reward for being successful in being the first through the breach and successfully taking the wall would be promotion. So the ensign might become a lieutenant, or even get a captaincy, and NCO might be made an officer, would be made into an officer, would get a commission. But the men, I think, they get like I don't know what they get, like a half a crown or something like really minor. But
yeah, I think it's a little bit of money. I think did you get some sort of emblem on your sleeve or on your arm? I think it was maybe in the shape of a leaf or a fern or something like that. You got something you was allowed to sew onto your uniform to show that you'd been in a forlorn hope. But yeah, it's not a great deal. I mean, it was really highly respected if you had that on your uniform. It's like, oh God, that guy has faced death. So something, but yeah.
Well, then they were. He says repeatedly they were never short of volunteers for Forlorn Hopes, which you wouldn't expect. But these guys are just made of sterner stuff than anyone today, really. They
Or
would
isn't
do
there
it
one
for
bit in one of the later ones where Harper is dying to be in the Forlorn Hope? like there's no way you're gonna not let me be in the Forlorn Hope, is there? Like you're kidding me. Of course you're gonna let me in it. That sort of thing. Even though, yeah, it's crazily dangerous.
Well, a lot of guys, there's plenty of guys that would just want to do it just to do it, like just for the thrill of it. Like most soldiers aren't going to be like that, but you're always going to have a certain percentage of them that are just up for stuff like that because they just love it. As strange as that is to believe, but they just want that kind of action. They want the heroism of it, but however they see it or justify it to themselves, they want to get in that meat grinder, or they want the glory of doing it. You know, it's not about the material rewards of it. It's the kind of elevating yourself through your heroism to achieve something great. And an uneducated scum of the earth enlisted man might not think of it in those sort of terms, but that's often what they were doing it for. Just to do it.
And I think war or combat was a lot more romanticized then. There wasn't the mass experience of World War One or World War Two, obviously. I think the lie that combat is in any way glorious, particularly, hadn't taken hold. So yeah, most of those guys would have just thought it was a glorious thing to do. And I was reading some accounts just the other day from slightly later period, the later Victorian period. But yeah, guys saying when they see a forward company coming back and they're seeing the casualties, men in the late Victorian period were shattered by artillery, and they come back and see these sort of World War One type injuries and just completely shocked, like, oh, what? I didn't realize war did that to men. Like, oh my God, like what the hell have I got myself into? So yeah, I think the idea of volunteering for the Forlorn Hope would, for a lot of these guys, just been they might have been chomping at the bit because war just was more romantic then. That's how people perceived it more. What do you think?
Yeah, it could well be. That could well be a part of it. Certainly, attitudes have changed, and we were saying earlier about how brutal it was for their day-to-day life was so brutal for these guys. So I think their risk of death through disease or whatever was already a part of their lives anyway. You know, they were like they're marching around hungry and starving in terrible conditions a lot of the time.
Just in
And
general, life was a lot more cheap.
yeah, basically, they're like so many of these soldiers and officers just die from disease. They get dysentery and they just die. Like that's if you're reading about the history of a particular regiment, it's like, oh, this major is the major just gets ill and dies. Like he's ill for a week and he dies, and then you know
Just gets
the
fever or
just gets a
malaria.
fit. Yeah, they're just dying all the time. So maybe they no one wants to die, but it was just it would have been less of a big thing. I was thinking, I was reading about a firing squad, and I think it said they would. This is one of the Sharpe books. When a soldier's going to be executed, and sometimes even though there's like 12 rifles shooting them, 12 muskets shooting them, they might miss or not be killed by the volley. The guy getting being executed, and then it was down to the officer commanding the firing squad to take his pistol and walk up to the guilty man who'd somehow survived the execution, and just shoot him in the head with his pistol. And like so you're just a junior officer, and you get draw lots or whatever to lead the execution, the firing squad. You just have to you got to go and finish this guy off. So it's just one of your guys maybe, and you have to bowl up to him and just pop him in the head. Not like a firing squad where there's a number of guys, so no one person has to feel necessarily guilty for shooting them, but the officer's expected to go up and just shoot this guy in the head. If that was someone today, that would be the most horrific thing you could imagine, right?
Yeah, whereas that guy probably as a drummer boy already flogged 3 men to death over many hours already. No, I'm joking. But yeah, no, your point you're making, yeah, it's just a much more brutal time, isn't it? Life just does seem to be so much cheaper. Or maybe we're at a civilizational high where we value our lives so much dearer. I think maybe the world where life is a lot cheaper, like in the Sharpe universe and in reality in the late 18th century, early 19th century, perhaps that's just more the norm. That's the way it was always been more. We're in
Sure.
an odd place where everyone's life is sort of uber precious. That's the exception to the rule, maybe.
No, absolutely. Yes, that's definitely true. And even we might be in a civilizational low right now, where our society is so kind of corrupt and backward and inverted that that's how we're seeing stuff. Where our material existence is so precious, whereas throughout all the rest of history, your material existence is only one part of your reality. Whereas they would all expect to have an afterlife of some sort, right? And how you behave in this material realm is only it kind of dictates how you will go on to exist in the next reality. So the manner of your death has always been something incredibly important and powerful, whereas us today, it's we just don't think about it, or we try not to think about it, or we're just trying to cling on to life, cling on to the material world, whereas throughout the rest of history, it was more important to die with honor or to die bravely than to live as a coward or a weakling or someone who hasn't faced that. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, sir. Says so in scripture, sir.
Exactly. It does. It literally does. Yeah.
So, I mean, carrying on with the plot, then you get to the day, der Tag, when the British are going to blow the hole in the wall and get in, and they do, and they have 2 forlorn hopes. Harris and Baird and Wellesley decide they're going to have 2 forlorn hopes. One that goes in, and as they go in the breach, they're going to go left or north, and the other one the other way, and take the perimeter by doing that. And that's real.
Yeah,
That's what happened in real life.
Two attack columns. Yeah.
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 And I think, as you say, Baird either leads. He might not be actually in the van.
No, he's not at the front, but
he's in there though, with it wielding his claymore. And yeah, they get in, and I suppose just to cut to the chase, I mean, what happens in real life and what Cornwell depicts is that the Tiger of Mysore himself, the Tippoo Sultan, does die in the melee, doesn't he?
Yeah, because he's up on the wall, right? So he's actually one of the defenders on the inner wall, shooting against the attacking British that are attacking through the outer wall. And the Tippoo was seen by multiple people standing there shooting. So he's got loads of men handing him loaded muskets. So he's taking a
Or
musket,
rifles, hasn't he got
shooting it.
antique rifles that are cutting edge?
Oh,
and
maybe
he's a really
his
great
fancy,
shot.
yeah, he's got his fancy rifles, I guess. And yeah, so he's just shooting round after round into the attacking columns. But then at some point, one of the columns attacks one of the what do you call it? One of the kind of buttress walls between the outer wall and the inner wall. There are these. They are joined, and one of the officers leads, or maybe a sergeant leads an attack across these buttress walls from the outer wall to the inner wall, and then that kind of breaks the back of the defences. And that at some point, as it's clear the British are going to get through, the Tippoo decides to discretion is the whatever the phrase is. What is it? Discretion is the
part of valor.
Better part of valor, yeah. And he decides to leg it.
Run
no
away,
one knows exactly.
Run away.
Yeah, no one knows exactly what happened, but the story is that he was legging it to get to the outer wall and get out of the city and leg it there. But it's more probable he was trying to get into the city, across the city, and out at the north or whatever, and get from Seringapatam to Mysore itself or to some other place and carry on fighting. But at some point he was killed, and this is a big part of the Sharpe mythology, is the fact that it's Richard Sharpe in the story that kills him, and in actual history no one knows who killed him, but it's suspected he was it was probably someone from the Grenadier Company of the I don't know what regiment.
Of the 33rd, I think.
Was it of the 33rd? I thought it was from a different. A different regiment. Anyway, no one knows who it was, but that's the good thing, is because it obviously was a British soldier or some British soldiers who killed the actual Tippoo and then looted his body. Or he wasn't. I don't think he was actually fully dead. So he was shot and his body had been looted, and his jewels and his gems and his gold and his silver and his rubies and all the rest of it were looted off his body by whoever it was that killed him. And no one knows what happened to those jewels, because obviously whoever it was not an officer and wouldn't have been able to keep that stuff. It would have been claimed as prize money. It would have been claimed as part of the prize of the city, and it would have been, the jewels would have been sold and distributed. The money would have been distributed amongst the senior officers in the same way as the riches of the city were. So whoever did it didn't come forward. So and then God knows what happened to them. God knows what happened to those jewels, and God knows what happened to the actual soldiers who took them.
Yeah, like in real life, the jewel, there was like a particular giant ruby, wasn't there, and it's just never surfaced since.
Yeah, well, that's what Sharpe takes, isn't it? In the plot, and he later keeps it in his hair, doesn't he? He ties it up in like a bun in the back of his hair. But yeah, in the story, in this story, it's Sharpe that kills the Tippoo. Sharpe that takes all his jewels and enriches himself. And then in actual history, what happened was some of the Tippoo's men find the Tippoo either dead or almost dead, and they put his body in a palanquin and start taking it through the city. But then that palanquin gets attacked, and the men carrying him just dump him, and they get killed or they run or something, and his body lies somewhere else further in the city until it is eventually found. And the next day the Tippoo is buried in his family vault in the city. But in the story, Richard Sharpe gets away with a fortune. But
it's quite a good final scene, isn't it? When there's like this final scene where him and the Sultan come face to face, and there's a bit of a standoff, and Sharpe ends up just shooting him between the eyes, like pretty cold-blooded. Or he goes up to him and sort of slaps him in the face. At one point, I think it says it slaps him in the cheek while he's dying on the ground, going, like, you won't need these, as he's taking the jewels off of him. But yeah, as you say, in real life, no one knows exactly. Yeah, because whoever looted his body just never came forward, and the specific gems and jewels have never surfaced since. But yeah, when the city was taken. You know, that's the end of the fourth Anglo-Mysore War, and it's the end of those set of wars. So it's sort of a bit of a watershed moment in the history of British India, or the East India Company in India. Yeah, apparently they take the company takes, or the crown takes, loads of booty. Like, is it hundreds of thousands of pounds in
2 million, 2 million in
bloody hell.
2 million in that money, which is equivalent to probably about, well, it's hard to say exactly because inflation isn't exactly linked to, you know, purchasing power or whatever you call it, but it's probably equivalent of about 250 to 300 million in today's money.
Not bad for a day's work.
Of loot, yeah, and how prize money works is that a percentage of that is shared amongst the senior officers. So like the generals get a big percentage, and then the next level down get a share another amount, and then on down basically. So I'm not sure that lieutenants get anything, but the senior officers certainly made fortunes, yeah, by taking the city.
And it's interesting that there's some of it still around today, as in the British Museum or the Victoria and Albert Museum. There was a famous throne that Tippoo Sultan had, or there was some sort of organ machine, some sort of tiger-themed organ machine or something that the Tippoo had, and that's, I think, in the Victoria and Albert Museum today in London. So yeah.
Yeah, his throne was smashed up like straight away, but some of it was, like, some bits of it or whatever was taken by the British. So that, I think that is in London. Yeah, some part of his throne, and yeah, that tiger thing. So it was a machine. It's like a tiger. It's in the story, isn't it? It's in Sharpe's Tiger, and you like crank it at the back, and it growls and like rips the guts out of a redcoat, and that was what the Tippoo had made.
But it's like a big toy, like an automaton thing, isn't it? Right?
Yeah. It was like a box with it's like a scene, you know, like and you sort of crank the back of it, and it's supposed to be like a bellows. It's supposed to make a sound. Apparently it got bombed in the Blitz, and now it doesn't. It got restored.
Oh yeah,
but
that's right.
it doesn't make the same sound anymore. So it just kind of like wheezes. But apparently the Tippoo found it highly amusing. But yeah, so we got that, and all the riches of the city, and then the Hindu royal family was restored to the throne of Mysore.
But they were puppets, weren't they? Still.
Yeah, under the protection of the British, in the same way that your local restaurant's under the protection of the mafia, you know. So the Tippoo's rule was ended.
Yeah, there's one thing from that final historical note that Bernard Cornwell puts at the end of Sharpe's Tiger, just sort of a judgment on Tippoo Sultan. He writes this, quote, "Today the Tippoo is a hero to many Indians who regard him as a proto-independence fighter. This seems a perverse judgment. Most of the Tippoo's enemies were other Indian states, though admittedly his fiercest fights were against the British and their Indian allies. But he could never entirely rely upon his Hindu subjects. No one is certain that he was betrayed on the day of his death, but it seems more than likely that several Hindu officers, like the fictional Appa Rao, were deliberately lukewarm in their support. The Tippoo's Muslim religion and his preference for the Persian language mark him as being outside the mainstream of modern Indian tradition, which is perhaps why I was assured by one educated Indian that the Tippoo had, in truth, been a Hindu. He was not, and no amount of wishful thinking can make him into a more acceptable Indian hero." End quote. So yeah, I mean, that's an interesting angle to bear in mind. That he was just as much. Or there's one bit in Sharpe's Challenge where they have this character in it who's sort of a native Mysorean, you know, an indigenous member of Mysore, and he starts off by being quite aggressive towards the English. He says stuff like, "You're just the enemy of my enemy, just a necessary evil right now." And by the end, he's sort of a lot more, I don't know what the screenwriter was thinking particularly, but he was more like, "Oh, I didn't mean that. You're actually good men, But yeah, no, it's just interesting to bear in mind that in real life, the Tippoo Sultan, it wasn't just India versus England. It was more complicated than that.
Yeah, well, India was, it's as divided as Europe was. There's multiple ethnicities, multiple kingdoms, some tiny little places and some huge kingdoms, but there was no kind of unity at all before British rule. No.
And like at the siege of Seringapatam, it's like the British Crown might have bankrolled it, but there were very few Brits there, relatively.
Yeah,
It's mainly
very few. Yeah.
Indians versus Indians.
Yeah, well, the East India Company, I think it was supposed to be entirely self-financing. Obviously, the British Crown got drawn into this stuff, and it ended up having actual King's officers and some of the King's regiments were there, but it was mostly a East India Company funded and run and organised affair. It's just that when things got a bit serious, the Crown would send in its own troops, maybe to pull rank and take charge, like with Wellesley and stuff. But yeah, it's largely an East India Company thing, and they were mostly Indian troops, and they had a lot of Indian administrators and stuff as well. And then, as you say, like Mary Bickerstaff was a Anglo-Indian mixed race woman, and there was a lot of those in the East India Company as well, because obviously a lot of the British went over and took Indian wives, and then their offspring ended up being this kind of an administrator class, and they continued to do that even after the East India Company was no longer existed, and even up until the end of British rule. So yeah, it wasn't. There's an argument to be made against as to how British it really was, really. In practice, obviously the leadership was, but a lot of the fighting was done by Indians against Indians. But then the people that became really rich were the Brits. Especially after the fall of this city, where a lot of the jewels were. And when the city fell, there was just a complete there was looting from all the men as they burst into the city, because a lot of the soldiers knew that they would only get a chance to make any kind of wealth was through looting. They certainly weren't going to make it through their pay, right? So what they would do is the opportunity, to loot a corpse or whatever, or to loot a city. So they would go kind of berserk when they got into a city, just searching for whatever they could find. If one soldier could get a huge fistful of gold coins, then it'd probably piss it all away, but in theory it could be set up for life.
Yeah, but Colonel Wellesley took quite a dim view of it, though, didn't he? That sort of
Baird apparently was because of his hatred for the Tippoo and for Indians generally, or for the Mysoreans, because of his long captivity by them. He didn't seem to be minded to put a stop to the looting. He just was happy to, like, carry on, lads. And it was Wellesley that put a stop to it. Yeah. So
I think Wellesley actually ordered a handful of men hung for looting, and that was sort of setting a fairly new precedent. And it's something he did much, like a lot in the Peninsular War as well, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he did. Yeah. So this is a quote from Wellesley describing General Baird. He said he's a gallant, hard-headed, lion-hearted officer, but he had no talent, no tact. He had strong prejudices against the natives, and he was particularly disqualified from his manners, habits, etc., and it was supposed his temper for the management of them. He had been the Tippoo's prisoner for years. He had a strong feeling of the bad usage he had received during his captivity. So yeah, Baird, at the end of this night of looting, and not that Baird was doing it, but the night of the sack of the city, Baird wrote to Harris asking to be relieved of commanding the city due to exhaustion, but then he later denied that he'd done that.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's interesting.
And then Harris ordered Wellesley into the city to restore order, and then Baird was extremely upset by it, and he felt it should have been his. But yeah, apparently had a huge row with Harris about it. but Harry stood by Wellesley basically. And this is what Wellesley said in his dispatches: "I came in to take command on the morning of the 5th, and by hanging, flogging, etc., restored order among the troops. I hope I have gained the confidence of the people." So yeah, so then Wellesley was made governor of the city, and he was governor for, I think, a couple of years actually, to restoring order and settling everything down again.
Yeah, so it was from that he got a reputation for, because it mentions he's still quite young, in his very late 20s, I think.
Yeah.
But he got a reputation for being, what's the word, sort of just a safe pair of hands. Because there's one thing to be a successful commander in the field. Quite often that requires, skills that aren't the same as you need for being a governor. You might need to be really impetuous and aggressive. There's sort of opposite qualities almost. And so, yeah, it's kind of rare to have someone that's really, really good at both. And so, yeah, that's where he sort of gained that reputation, I think, because in the next books or the next bit of history, the next episodes in Wellesley's life, in real life, you've got the Battle of Assaye, and he goes on to more successes in India, basically, doesn't he?
Yeah. So the next book is Sharpe's Triumph, and that is the climactic battle in that is Assaye, and that was, as far as Wellesley was concerned, after everything else that he'd done in his life, after the Peninsular Campaign and after Waterloo, he was asked, "What's your greatest victory?" And without hesitation, he said, "Assaye." And that's what happens in the next book, which is Sharpe's Triumph. So we'll get to that next time.
Yeah. Hopefully we've done it a little bit of justice.
Yeah. There's so much to talk about that it's hard to summarize some of it, because obviously you can't talk about the whole history of British India and stuff, or the whole of the East India Company, or all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think we gave a fair account of events. And actually, Sharpe's Triumph is I think a much better book, just in terms of entertainment, and it's just more like a Sharpe story. There's a proper battle with infantry and cavalry and artillery, and it's just a better book, I think.
Yeah, it's not a pure origin story one. Whereas this is. Tiger is a little bit non-characteristic, really, of a Sharpe novel, isn't it?
Yeah, that's fair.
Here's 40 shillings on the drum for those who volunteer to come to list and fight the foe today, over the hills and far away. O'er the hills and o'er the main, through Flanders, Portugal and Spain, King George commands and we obey, over the hills and far away. When duty calls me, I must go to stand